The fourth time I packed that bag, nobody stopped me. I want you to understand what that meant. After everything, no wolf at the gate, no enormous grey shadow materializing out of the dark to take the strap in his teeth and haul 4 days of my dignity back up the stairs. The gate simply opened, and the road simply lay there in the moonlight, and for the first time in 4 days, I got to walk through it exactly as I had been demanding to. I made it about a mile before I understood that I had not won anything. There were 3 men on that road who had no business being on it, and they were not surprised to see me. And one of them said my name, out loud, on an empty road at midnight, like a man reading it off a list. And I finally understood why the wolf had never once let me reach that gate. 11 weeks earlier, I had arrived at Carrow Keep owing a dead man's debt, and I had counted every single day until I could leave it. My name is Linnea, and I break horses, which is a trade people find charming until they watch me do it and realise it mostly involves being thrown into a fence by something that weighs 800 pounds and has opinions. I was 24 that spring, stable-born, no house, no rank, no dowry beyond a good hand with a difficult animal. My father died owing the crown 90 silver he could not pay, and in Carrow a debt does not die with the man. It passes down. So it passed to me, and I came to the king's stables to work it off the only way I knew how. And for 2 years I broke the crown's horses and counted my days, and did not once let myself think of that place as anything but a sentence I was serving. Carrow was Alpha country, which meant the king's word was weather and the king's debts were law. King Dacian ruled from the keep, the strongest wolf in the northern reaches, and in 2 years I had spoken to him precisely never, because a woman working off a dead man's debt does not chat with the man who holds it. That is the part everyone gets wrong when they tell this story. They tell it like a romance. It started as a ledger. The day my term ended, the debt master signed my release, and I walked out of that office lighter than I had been in 2 years, and I went straight to my room over the stables and packed my bag. It was not much of a bag. Everything I owned fit in it, with room left over, which tells you most of what you need to know about my 2 years at Carrow. A change of clothes, my father's knife, a coil of good rope, the whole of my life, and it did not even strain the strap. I carried it to the west gate at dusk. I got perhaps 9 steps past the gatehouse before something very large came out of the dark. I have worked with animals my entire life. I know exactly how a predator moves when it intends harm, and this was not that. The king's wolf, and there was no mistaking whose he was. The thing was the size of a plough horse and had eyes like a struck match, walked out of the shadows, sat down directly in my path, and looked at me. Then he took the strap of my bag in his teeth, quite gently, and pulled. "Let go," I said. He did not let go. He pulled, with the patient, unhurried certainty of a creature who has all night and knows you don't. And my bag came out of my hand, and he turned around and carried it back through the gate. I want to be clear that I followed him, not because I had decided anything, because he had my father's knife. He carried that bag up 2 flights of stairs into the room I had just emptied, and dropped it on the bed. Then he sat down next to it, tail curled around his paws, and looked at me with an expression of enormous personal satisfaction. "That's stealing," I told him. He yawned. I packed it again the next morning. He took it off me at the same gate, at the same 9 steps, and carried it back to the same bed. I tried the east gate on the 3rd day, because I am not stupid, and discovered that he was apparently capable of being at the east gate too, and that he found my attempt at strategy so delightful that he brought the bag back at something close to a trot. By the 4th day, the entire stable yard had started placing bets, which is how I ended up in the king's own study, 4 days into the most humiliating standoff of my life. Demanding an audience, I had no standing whatsoever to demand. "Your Grace." I dropped the bag on the floor between us, which I am told is not how one addresses an alpha king, and which I could not at that moment be made to care about. Your wolf has stolen my luggage 4 times in 4 days. King Dacian looked at the bag, then at me. He was younger than I had expected from 2 years of hearing about him, and considerably better looking than was strictly fair. And he had the specific stillness of a man holding something enormous, very carefully in check. "That does sound like him," he said. "That's it? That sounds like him? I'm not certain what else you'd like me to say." "I'd like you to say why." I heard my own voice getting away from me and let it. "I've paid the debt, I've got the release signed. I am the only person in this entire keep who is legally, formally, on paper, allowed to walk out of it, and every single time I try, your animal takes my bag off me like I'm a puppy that's wandered too far from the litter. So call him off. Whatever this is, tell him to stop." Something moved behind the king's eyes. It was there and gone, and I did not have a name for it yet, but I have thought about it a great deal since. "I have no idea what he's doing," Dacian said. That was the first lie. I did not know it yet, but I clocked it, because I break horses for a living, and I have spent my whole life reading exactly the small flinch a body makes when it is saying a thing its own bones disagree with. He said it too smoothly. He said it like a line. "You're the Alpha King," I said. "He's your wolf." He is, and in 11 years he has obeyed me in everything, in battle, in council, in every moment that has ever mattered. Dacian looked at the bag on his floor, and his jaw did something complicated. "And apparently, the one thing in the world he will not do is let you through my gate, and I cannot explain that to you in a way that will satisfy either of us. So order him." "I'd rather not." "No," he said. "I find I would rather not." And then, before I could get my mouth around any of the several things I wanted to say to that, he picked up my bag himself and handed it back to me with the grave courtesy of a man returning a dropped glove, and said, "I'm told you're very good with the grey mare. Nobody else can get a saddle on. Is that true?" And I stood there with my own luggage in my hands, entirely outmanoeuvred, and understood that I had just been dismissed by a man who had answered nothing, and somehow left me feeling like I'd been given something. His wolf was a liar, and I was beginning to suspect he was too. The days after that fell into a shape I had not planned for, and did not know how to refuse. I kept packing. He kept not explaining. The wolf kept intercepting. And, I will admit, because this story does not work if I lie to you, that somewhere around the 6th attempt, it had stopped being a fight and become something closer to a conversation. I would carry the bag out. He would take it. I would tell him exactly what I thought of him the whole way back up the stairs, and he would listen with his ears forward, like a creature receiving high praise, and drop it on the bed and sit on it. He started sitting on it. That was new. Apparently 4 days of returning it had not been sufficiently clear. I tried in the 2nd week to outthink him. This was arrogant of me, and I paid for it accordingly. I gave the bag to a carter headed south and walked to the gate, empty-handed, on the entirely sound theory that a wolf cannot steal luggage that is not there. I got 11 steps, 2 better than my record, before I understood that he was not at the gate at all. He was 200 yards down the road, sitting in the middle of it, with my bag between his paws and the carter nowhere in sight, radiating the smug tranquility of a creature who has anticipated you and would like you to know it. "Where is the carter?" He thumped his tail once. I never did find out. The stable-yards betting had by then developed into something with rules. Old Hester, who ran the tack room, was holding the coin and had, I was informed, given me odds so poor that 2 of the grooms considered it a personal insult to the sport. Somebody had started a tally on the tack room wall. Somebody else had drawn a small and deeply unflattering portrait of me under it. The worst part, the genuinely unbearable part, is that I had begun looking forward to it. I would carry the bag out at dusk, and he would be there every time, and there was something in being expected that I had not felt in 2 years of that keep. Nobody at Carrow had ever waited for me. I was the girl who paid a dead man's debt. I was a line in a ledger with hands. And here was this enormous, ridiculous animal who rearranged his entire evening around the certainty that I would try, and who had never once been wrong. I told him so on the 9th night, halfway up the stairs, with my life in his teeth. "You know I'm going to keep doing this," I said. He set the bag on the bed, sat down on it, and looked at me with what I can only describe as enormous patience. "Right," I said. "So are you." "Fine." And in between, there was the king, who did not once ask me to stay. That was the strange part. That was the part I could not get my teeth into. A man whose wolf was physically preventing my departure had a great many things he could have said to me, and he said none of them. He did not order me to remain. He did not offer me wages, or a position, or the 1,000 small hooks a powerful man uses to keep a person where he wants her. He asked me about horses. He asked me what I would do with my freedom, and listened to the answer like it mattered. Once, when I told him I meant to buy a paddock in the south and break horses for people who paid in coin rather than in ledgers, he went quiet for a long moment, and then said, "That's a good plan. You should have it," in the voice of a man reading his own sentence aloud. He never touched me. He never once closed the distance between us in all those weeks, and I noticed the not closing more than I have ever noticed anything a man actually did. Master Ferren was the only person in that entire keep who seemed to be on my side. He was the Crown's debt master, a mild, apologetic little man with ink on his fingers who had signed my release himself. And he sought me out in the stable yard in my 2nd week of the standoff, wearing an expression of genuine concern. "This has gone on long enough," he said. "It isn't right. You've paid what you owed. I signed it. I have the record. A free woman being kept in this keep by an animal, whatever the king says about not controlling it. If you'd like, I can arrange things quietly. Papers, a horse, a route the gate watch won't be looking at. You'd be gone before anyone noticed." I could have cried, honestly. 2 weeks of an entire keep treating my life like the stable yard's favourite comedy. And here was one small ink-stained man treating it like an injustice. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because I've spent 30 years watching this keep grind people up in its ledgers," Ferren said, "and I would like, just once, to see one of them get out." I did not know, that afternoon, what I was actually being offered, or by whom. I did not know that the kindest man in Carrow was the only one in it who wanted me on a dark road, alone. Or why, if you want to find out what a king is hiding when he refuses to ask for the one thing he wants, and whether a woman who has spent 2 years counting the days to a gate can survive finally walking through it, stay with me. The reason that Wolf never let me reach the road is not the reason any of us thought, and I lived every second of finding it out. Lady Sorrel made her position clear in my 3rd week, in a corridor, in front of an audience, the way high-born women always do. She was everything I was not, and she had spent, I gathered, a year and a half being extremely certain she would be Carrow's Luna, and she looked at me the way you look at manure tracked onto a good rug. "How resourceful," she said to her ladies, rather than to me. I did wonder how a stable girl would manage it. Training the beast, apparently since she couldn't train the man. "I don't train anything that doesn't want training," I said. "That's rather the difference between us. You've been trying to saddle him for a year and a half, and he still won't take the bit." One of her ladies made a sound she tried very hard to turn into a cough. Sorrel's face went the colour of a bad wine, and I thought, walking away, that I had just met the person who would end up being my problem. I was wrong about that, and it very nearly cost me everything. The thing that changed it all, I found the way I have found most of the important things in my life, by being somewhere I had no business being, on an errand nobody had given me. Orin sent me to the king's study with a report on the grey mare, because Orin was the king's second, and had apparently decided somewhere in the third week that the stable girl was going to be a permanent feature, and might as well be useful. Dacian was not there. His desk was, and, on his desk, weighted under an inkwell, was a document with my name on it. I read it. I am not sorry. It was a writ of free passage signed and sealed by the king himself. Safe conduct through every gate and every road in Carrow. Immunity from any claim, crown or otherwise. Beneath it, a deed, a paddock. 40 acres in the south, good grazing, bought outright and held in my name, with a purse attached sufficient to stock it with the kind of horses I had told him, once, in an unguarded moment, that I meant to spend my life breaking. Everything I had ever said I wanted. All of it. Bought, signed, and sitting on his desk. Dated 11 weeks ago, the same week I first tried to leave. He had been sitting on it for 11 weeks. He had never sent it. And I stood there in his study, holding proof that the man whose wolf would not let me through the gate had, that very same week, quietly bought me a life I would never need to come back from. You weren't meant to see that. He was in the doorway. I do not know how long he had been there. 11 weeks, I said. You've had this 11 weeks. You could have handed it to me the first night, and I'd have been gone before the frost. Why is it still on your desk? And Dacian, who had lied to me smoothly and easily for 11 weeks about a wolf we both knew perfectly well, was doing exactly what he was told not to, finally stopped. Because if I hand it to you, you go, he said. And if I ask you to stay, you stay, and I will never know for the rest of my life whether you stayed because you wanted to, or because a king asked you to. You came here owing me 90 silver. For 2 years, every single thing you did in this keep, you did because I held a piece of paper with your father's name on it. His voice had gone rough. There is no version of me asking you for anything that isn't the crown asking. You cannot say no to me, Linnea. Not really. Not in a way either of us could ever trust. So I decided the only honest thing I could do was buy you the means to leave, and say nothing, and let you go. And the wolf, he said, with the specific despair of a man who has been losing an argument with himself for 11 weeks, does not care about my principles. The wolf has known what he wants since the first week, and has no intention whatsoever of pretending otherwise. And I have spent every single day since, telling him to stand down, and every single night, being quietly, shamefully glad he doesn't listen. He dragged a hand across his face. So yes, I lied to you. Every time. I know exactly what he's doing. He's doing the thing I've forbidden myself to do, and I have not stopped him. And I am not going to pretend that makes me innocent. Something in me went very still and very clear. 11 weeks. 11 weeks of a man tying his own hands so thoroughly that the only part of him free to want me was the part that couldn't speak. 11 weeks of me packing a bag out of pure spite at a man I had decided was toying with me, and the truth was that he had been the only person in that entire keep, treating my freedom as though it were actually mine. And I was furious. Not at the lie, at the arithmetic. You absolute coward, I said, and I did not soften it, because I was done softening things for men who outranked me. You worked all that out on your own, did you? Sat here for 11 weeks deciding what my yes was worth, deciding I couldn't be trusted with my own answer, and never once thought to ask me what I thought about it. I put the writ down on his desk. You don't get to protect me from my own choice by making it for me. That's not honour. That's just a nicer-looking cage than the ledger was. At least Master Ferren's paperwork was honest about what it was. He did not answer. He had, I think. No answer. Hand me the writ, I said. Properly. Look at me and hand it to me, and then ask me the question you've been swallowing for 11 weeks, and let me be the one who decides what my own answer is worth. That's the only version of this that's real. Anything else, and you're just the ledger with better manners. And that, I understand now, though I did not then, is the exact moment my life stopped being in danger from a wolf and started being in danger from a man with ink on his fingers. Because I had just decided to stay. And Master Farron, whose kindness I had been so grateful for, could not afford that at all. I found out why the next morning, and I found out the way I find out everything, which is by being underestimated in a room full of paper. I went to the debt office to have my release copied. I wanted my own record of it, now that I intended to stay by choice rather than by sentence. And Farron was not there. And his ledgers were. My father owed 90 silver. The ledger said 190. In a hand that was not the original clerk's. The 9 had been made into a 19, and it had been done cleanly, and it had been done years ago. And when I pulled the volume beneath it, and the one beneath that, I found the same clean, careful alteration on 11 other names, 11 other stable-born, houseless, unimportant people quietly serving an extra year, or 2, or 4, on debts that had been paid before they ever started counting. I had finished paying my father's debt 2 years ago. I had spent 2 years of my life working off a decimal point that a mild little man had drawn with his own pen, and he had signed my release only when the king's wolf started making me visible, and he had offered me a horse and a quiet road, and papers the gate watch would not look at, not to free me. To make certain the only person in Cairo who had ever had reason to open his ledgers was somewhere no one would ever find her. Which brings us back to the road. The 4th time I packed that bag, nobody stopped me. No wolf. No grey shadow at the gate. I had told the stable yard I was riding south to see the paddock, and Farron had heard it. And Farron had made absolutely certain that this time the gate was clear, because he had spent 11 weeks watching a wolf keep me alive, and had finally found the one night I would walk out of that keep, with no one watching but him. 3 men on an empty road at midnight, and one of them said my name like he was reading it off a list. I got my father's knife out of my bag. I want that on the record, because people have since decided I was rescued, and I was not rescued. I was helped. I put my knife in the first man's arm to the hilt, and I put my boot through the second one's knee, because I have spent my whole life being thrown into fences by animals that weigh 800 pounds, and I have never once had the luxury of going quietly. The third man got a hand on me. He did not keep it long, because the wolf came out of that dark, like something the road itself had produced, and I understood, in the half-second before everything happened at once, exactly what he had been doing at that gate for 11 weeks. He had not been keeping me in, he had been keeping me alive. Some part of him had known, the way animals know, the way the king never did, that the day I walked through that gate unaccompanied would be the day someone had arranged for me to. What followed was fast and brutal and mercifully brief. Dacian was a minute behind him, on foot, having apparently run a mile in the dark from a keep he'd left the instant his wolf did. And I have since had a great deal to say to him about the fact that he did not stop to bring guards, and he has never once apologised for it. Farron did not run. That was the thing about him. He had never once needed to run in 30 years, because nobody looks twice at the man holding the pen. He was still in his office at dawn, ink on his fingers, when Orrin brought him the 11 ledgers I had stacked on his own desk, with the alterations marked in my hand. He tried, at the reckoning, to say it was clerical. 30 years of small, mild errors, all of them, coincidentally, in the Crown's favour and in his own pocket, all of them, coincidentally, on people whose names no house would ever speak for. It did not work. There were 11 ledgers, and there were 11 people, and by the end of that season, every one of them was standing in Cairo's great hall, being handed back the years he had stolen, which the Crown could not actually give them, and paid for instead in silver and land, and a formal apology from a king who read every single name aloud himself, slowly, looking at every single face, because he had decided that a man who signs a ledger he has not read is a man who deserves exactly what his kingdom becomes. I stood at the back for that, and I did not go up when my own name was read. I had already been paid what I was owed, and it had not come in silver. It had come 11 weeks earlier, from an animal who had decided the girl in the ledger was worth 2 flights of stairs a night, at a time when not one person in that keep, including the man who signed her release, including the king himself, including, if I am honest, the girl, had thought she was worth anything at all. Orin found me at the back of that hall and stood beside me without saying anything for a while, which I have come to understand is how that man says a great deal. He wanted to read yours first, Orin said eventually. I told him not to. Told him you'd hate it. I'd have hated it. That's what I said. He watched Dacian work down the list, name by name, face by face. 11 weeks I watched that man sit on a writ he'd bought you and say nothing. I thought he was a fool. I've served him 11 years, and I've never once thought that before. And I told him so. Twice. Orin's mouth moved. Barely. He said he'd rather be a fool than a man who'd taken a yes that wasn't free. I didn't understand it at the time. Watching him read those names, I think I do. 11 other people spent years in a cage nobody checked, I said, because everyone was too busy being frightened of the king to bother reading what they were signing for him. Orin nodded slowly, and now he reads everything, every ledger, every order, every name. It's made him unbearable to work for and considerably better at his job. He glanced at me. You did that. Not the wolf. You. Lady Sorrel, I should say, had nothing to do with any of it. She disliked me thoroughly and honestly, and to my face for a year and a half. And it turned out that was the most trustworthy relationship I had in that keep, because at least I always knew exactly where her knife was. It was the man who brought me tea and called my situation an injustice who put me on that road. I have thought about that a great deal since. The people who tell you plainly that they want you gone are almost never the ones who arrange it. They stitched my arm in the king's own study, and the healer told me it would scar. And I decided I did not mind. A woman who spent 2 years working off a debt she did not owe ought to have at least one mark that she chose. Dacian did not leave while they worked. When it was done, he took the writ of free passage off his desk, 11 weeks of a man's cowardice, sealed and signed, and he knelt in front of my chair, and he handed it to me, properly, looking at me. There, he said. It's yours, the road, the paddock, the 40 acres, all of it. No claim, no debt, no crown, nothing owed to me or to anyone. You can be gone by morning, and there is not one thing in this world I would do to stop you, and I want you to hold it in your hand while I ask, so that you know exactly how free you are when you answer. Ask, then, stay. His voice cracked on the one word, a man who had not let himself say it in 11 weeks. Not as my subject. Not as anything you owe. Stay, because I have been quietly, unforgivably in love with you since the week you told a king his wolf was a thief, and his excuse was worse. And I would rather be told no by you honestly tonight than be said yes to for the rest of my life by anyone who was never free to say anything else. I kissed him first, with the writ still in my hand, because I wanted him to see me choose it. It was brief, and it was warm, and it settled something in me that had been braced for 2 years against ever wanting anything I was not permitted to have. That's a yes, I told him. For the record, since you've clearly been agonizing, for 11 weeks, your wolf worked it out in 4 days. My wolf, Dacian said, with enormous feeling, is a liar, a thief, and the only honest thing in this entire keep, and I have never once forgiven him for any of it. The fallout was not gentle, but most of it landed where it should. 30 years of a debtmaster's arithmetic came apart in a single ugly season, and several noble houses discovered their comfortable little labour arrangements had died with Ferrin's ledgers. The whole debt bondage system at Carrow was dismantled inside the year, on Dacian's order, which cost the Crown a genuinely absurd amount of money, and which he has never once mentioned regretting. 6 months later, I still break horses. I refuse to stop, and Dacian, who has learned by now which of my stubbornnesses are load-bearing, had the paddock built inside Carrow's walls instead of arguing. So the woman the court now calls Luna still spends her mornings being thrown into a fence by the grey mare, in front of an increasingly resigned audience of guards who have been forbidden from helping. The 40 acres in the south are still mine. I have never sold them. I ride down twice a year to look at them, and Dacian always asks, with a very carefully casual face, whether I've enjoyed the trip, and I always tell him the truth, which is that the best part is coming back. I keep the deed because a woman should always know exactly where her own road is. That is the entire point of having chosen not to take it. His wolf, having won comprehensively, has entirely abandoned any pretense of good behaviour. He sleeps across our doorway. He steals things. Orin has taken to calling him the Luna's actual second-in-command, which Dacian permits, mostly because arguing with the wolf about anything has a perfect record of not working. Old Hester never paid out the stable-yards bets. She ruled, with the authority of a woman who has run a tack room for 40 years and answers to no crown, that since I had eventually stopped packing, of my own free will rather than being stopped, the entire wager was void. There was nearly a riot. 2 grooms are still not speaking to her. I have been informed that the tally is preserved on the tackroom wall as a historical document, and that the unflattering portrait has been retouched, which I am choosing not to investigate. And the bag is still on the shelf, that absurd, half-empty bag that held the whole of my life and did not strain the strap. I never unpacked it, not properly. I keep it up there where I can see it, because for 4 days it was the only argument I had, and because a wolf with better sense than either of us carried it up 2 flights of stairs every time I was wrong about where I belonged. I still wonder what would have happened if Ferrin had been a little less kind to me, or if I'd taken his horse and his quiet road the first week he offered. I do not like where that thought ends, so I do not finish it. But I wonder about you. Did you see Ferrin coming, or did you spend as long as I did, being certain the danger was the woman who insulted me in the corridor? Tell me your theory in the comments. Comment the bag if you want to hear about the first time Dacian tried to help me with the grey mare and ended up in the water trough in front of his entire war council. And if you want more nights like this, one, a king who tied his own hands rather than take a yes he hadn't earned, a woman who packed the same bag 9 times out of spite, and a wolf with no principles whatsoever and considerably better instincts than either of them, stay close. There is more of Carrow left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know.